Welcome to The View, where recruitment, marketing and society comes together.
I'm chatting today with Matt Burney, Senior Strategic Advisor at Indeed, the world's largest job site. He's got some incredible insights into changes in the economy, demographics, and of course the influx of AI and how that's having a major change on recruitment. So listen on to find out some really interesting insights. I am lucky enough to be chatting with Matt Burney, Senior Strategic Advisor for Indeed. Matt, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, thanks for the invite. It's been a while since we see each other in person, but
it has.
Yeah, it should be fun.
Too long. So before we get any further, Senior Strategic Advisor, what does that mean? What does your job at Indeed entail?
So I guess I have a little bit of an odd job in that my role is principally to spend time on stage at events and doing PR and things like that. But as a core part of that, I have to do a lot of research. So
yeah.
I have to be very much across what's going on from an economics perspective, a technology perspective, and a recruitment perspective. So I kind of use those insights to start thinking about how we're going to talk about the world of recruitment as Indeed. My job is very much to be though I work for the company, not to be the person standing on stage talking about products and trying to sell things. I'm there more to give a bit of a voice about what's going on in the market more broadly and to help people understand the complexity of what's going on as well. To an extent, I do spend time with clients. I used to do a lot of client meetings and spend a lot of time with senior leaders. I now kind of cut that down, so it's the more sort of C-suite meetings that I'll have these days, where we're going and talking about, what the changes we're seeing at the moment really means to the market, what they mean to organizations, what they mean to the broader economy, and where companies can perhaps spot competitive advantage.
Fascinating stuff. And I mean, you mentioned conferences there. Obviously, we've bumped into each other a bunch of times at these things. Something that I keep hearing at conferences is this term VUCA, which I'm sure you've come across. Apparently, it was coined in the 1990s, but I've really only bumped into it in the last sort of 18 months. It was about volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I'm not totally sold on whether this is actually a new thing or whether the world has always been like this. But what's your take on the challenges and the change in what's facing TA teams and recruitment professionals right now?
I mean, I think the VUCA thing is, I find it personally hysterical that I've seen many talking heads suddenly come out and start saying, "Oh, we live in a VUCA world" and all this sort of thing. And
I get a little bit of sick in the back of my throat when I hear it. I don't know.
Yeah, I kind of know what you mean. I mean, I remember talking about VUCA as a concept when I worked for G4S, which is, God, this would have probably been 15 years ago we were having this conversation. But I remember going to the IAB and actually seeing a massive presentation about it. And it was a new bit of terminology 15 years ago. It's nothing new now. And I think you're broadly right that, uncertainty, complexity, it's the world that we live in and the world we always have lived in.
Yeah. I
think recruitment is constantly in that state of flux. It's by its very nature, it's very, at the moment, particularly very reactive rather than being proactive. And I think that's what leads us to be in a fairly uncertain world and an uncertain industry to an extent. But yeah, this is nothing new.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I didn't live through Vietnam or World War I or World War II or the Cuban Missile Crisis, all that sort of stuff. Feels like they would have been more uncertain and volatile times than, what we're living in now. Don't get me wrong, clearly there's change in the world, but I'm not sure it's anything that new.
No, I'm not a believer that this is a thing that we need to be going down the rabbit hole of shouting from the rooftops about, because it's a concept that's been around for a long time. As you say, the world has always been a complex and an ever-moving place. And I think it was one of those things that I saw somebody who shall remain nameless, who'd been going on about VUCA's a massive thing, and they'd given a presentation about it, and I saw a bunch of posts saying it's amazing, it's game-changing for our industry. And I thought, why is this game changing? When I stood up and talked about this 15 years ago, it was game changing then. It's been game changing about 5 times since then. Let's just move on, do something new.
Yeah. So you mentioned G4S there just a minute ago in terms of sort of 15 years. What's the career arc that's got you to this point at Indeed? Because I mean, I know you've been at Indeed now, a good while. but you had a solid career in sort of recruitment and technology and stuff like that beforehand.
Yeah, I'm just coming up on 10 years. In fact, I'm 2 months off 10 years at Indeed. So seen a lot of change there. But yeah, my industry experience is quite a long and storied one, really. I went to probably my first job board in, I think, 1998, which was I think it was called G2 Legal, which actually still exists somewhere.
Wow.
And it was a legal recruitment website that actually did paper applications, so it was way ahead of its time. And they were trying to sell into the legal profession, who at the time broadly didn't have the internet, so it was quite a tough sell. But yeah, I started out there, and then very rapidly moved on to working at Total Jobs. So when Total Jobs first was a thing, I was there in the heyday, still sending out faxes to clients and chasing contracts and stuff. And I'd worked at other job boards in between there, notably things like aviation job search, travel job search, stuff like that I got heavily involved in. And then worked for a couple of aggregators as well as a contractor. And I did social media sort of work, contracting, which is, the irony is not lost on me because I don't really use social media now. But I used to advise other people on how to do social media, which was how I wound up at G4S, actually.
What prompted you to move in-house? Was it you were just touching on the social media side led you there?
Yeah, it was one of those things. I have worked out very rapidly that I'm a terrible employee of myself. I'm not good at the kind of admin side of things, and I didn't particularly like doing business development. I really loved working with my clients, but just building pipeline was not a thing that I particularly enjoyed doing. So I was ideally looking for something in-house. It just happened that I knew Colin Minto, who was at G4S at the time.
Yeah.
And there was a guy called Andy Hanscom there as well. And they both were looking for somebody to go and manage their social media strategy at the time. And they said, "Oh, do you know anyone?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I'd like to go and do it." And the rest is kind of history. I went from doing that job through to principally looking after the Asia Middle East region. So I worked with a guy called Andrew Turner, who was the regional HR director for Asia Middle East. Spent a lot of time traveling out to all sorts of places, which was really interesting. Got to go to some places that not a lot of other people get to go to, which is very cool.
Okay.
And yeah, while I was there, got promoted into running things out of the group head office as well when structural changes happened. And during that process, I was arguably, I still have this conversation with the account manager who's now left Indeed. I think I was arguably the biggest Indeed customer in the world at the time.
Okay, right.
And I was approached by them to come and tell the story of my journey in my career and what I'd done using Indeed to go and transform a lot of the recruitment that we'd done at G4S. So yeah.
So how you went straight from G4S into Indeed, then following that interaction? So how was, I guess, it's not an uncommon move, right? Either from agency to in-house or technology to recruitment or vice versa. What was your journey between those two, and was there any friction there?
Well, no, I'd done an awful lot of presenting at G4S. We did some pretty out there projects, not least, we built multiple instances of our careers website with TriPad, as you well know. Yeah. And I did a number of projects. I did big projects out in India, did a few things in Hong Kong and China, projects that were out in Australia. I was involved in some very, very, very complex things out in Australia, which was good. So I had a story to tell. And I'd come back to the UK. It was very much on the speaker circuit. And then when Indeed approached me, the role was literally to go and tell almost the same story, but with a little bit of an Indeed twist to them. So for me, it wasn't terribly hard. It was the weird thing was that I didn't work for anybody in the UK. So my bosses were all in the US. My first day, I flew to Canada.
Right.
And then by my third day, I'd gone from Canada to Chicago and done a bunch of events in the US, just watching other people present, which was a bit weird. And then they sent me home, and my first 3 months, Paul Darcy, who was the VP of marketing, actually said to me, I just want you to read all of our content, and I expect you to know all of it. So I had 3 months of being sat in my old office, which I can see from here, reading presentations, watching videos of presentations, listening to audio of people presenting. And then I'd get random phone calls from people in the US who'd say, hey, I know that you should know this. Tell me about it. They'd phone me up and test my knowledge at random times of the day. And it was a great way to learn. It really was a great way to learn. I was very, very well prepared to present. I was very lucky to go to Austin in our old office and work with a guy who has been hugely influential on my career, called Andy Craig, who is, I would argue, probably the best speaker trainer in the world, but certainly the best that I've ever worked with. Andy's incredibly expensive, so I don't get to work with him as often anymore. But he really hammered home the benefit of really knowing your stuff, and absolutely rehearsing what it is that you're talking about, being an authority. There's a true value in being an authority on a particular subject, but also the importance of learning what storytelling feels like and looks like, and actually understanding how to use the right kind of language so people can access what you're talking about. Too often people spend time, I think, trying to sound intelligent on stage, and it loses something in the translation. It's a bit like somebody who posts a slide up with 1,000 things on it that you can't read. It's completely impenetrable, and there's kind of no point in doing it. So my transition into coming into Indeed was actually, thankfully, due to the team that I had, really smooth. And I went from doing a few small events to doing some very, very large events. And my first few years, my feet barely touched the ground. I traveled constantly. Paul Darcy and I did our world tour, so I was out
some good air miles there, I would imagine.
Oh god, yeah, the early days were fantastic. Not so much now. Now we've got an international team, I don't fly as much. But yeah, I from the G4S days of flying out to Asia Pacific all the time, and then with Indeed doing the same thing, the air miles had built up very, very well, Neil.
I bet they have. I'm really interested in that transition you described there, sort of becoming a professional and top rate speaker, communicator, storyteller. One of the things that strikes me is recruiters, I guess, are naturally, as people, likely to be decent communicators face to face, in interviews, in emails, over the phone. It's a sales and convincing and relationship business, but I don't see generally, perhaps until people are right up at head of talent or HRD, that they're naturally standing in front of a big room, communicating to a large audience. And I wonder if that is a valuable string to the bow, where quite often here, recruiters feel like they're undervalued and not taken as seriously as other colleagues around the table. Do you have a view on that?
Yeah, there's a few things in that, to be honest. I think the climate and the market has changed quite radically in the last few years. When I think back to my sort of early days of my in-house career, and actually kind of before then as well, the speaker circuit was something that you were sort of expected to be on. If you wanted to get a decent job, you wanted to be known, and we seem to have gone from people sharing their stories and their experience at meetups and events, which there used to be absolutely tons of them, to a bit of a shift towards, I'd rather just win an award for that. Winning an award, that's fine, but it doesn't allow you to learn those skills as being a communicator, and learn, I think, to an extent, also how to talk to people in your own business, because the stories that we tell, if we're getting up on stage, are the stories you should have told your leadership team about the project that you did. You should be able to communicate these things very clearly, because it's how you articulate value to an extent. So I'm a great believer in good, solid communication skills for people, particularly in the talent space. As you say, there is this feeling that we're under-recognized in talent, or perhaps undervalued. And I guess in some instances there's some truth to that, in others there isn't. And I think the fact that easy accessibility to being able to talk to peers at scale, and probably go on that path from I'm in a room of 5 people to I'm in a room of 20 people to suddenly that's 100 people, and then maybe you're on stage at a big event. That path isn't quite there these days. That's a great shame.
Why do you think that is? Why is that path not there in the same way as it was?
In all honesty, I think social media is probably the thing that killed it.
Yeah.
Everybody's obsessed with writing something and trying to get clicks and likes on that, and they kind of forget that the people that you stand up in front of and give a compelling story to, you touch those people much more effectively.
Yeah.
And I think that's been lost. I mean, thinking back to years ago, Jamie Leonard used to run Reconverse. Before that, things like My Long Lunch. There used to be, where I lived near Brighton, there used to be Brighton meetups for recruiters like twice a week. When I travelled out to Australia, it was a great example. I went to Sydney and I was blown away that every day of the week I could go and speak at an event, and it may have been 5 people, it may have been 50 people, but there was something always happening. I found that in India as well, that there were meetups for lots of recruiters in India. South Africa had a bit of a culture of it as well. The US, not so much so. But there was a real regularity to it. And I think, the idea that you could just get that story out through social media is what kind of changed that for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And that's a missing trick. And it's for 2 reasons. As I said, we should be able to articulate our value very, very clearly.
Yeah.
We should have told these stories internally. That's how I became a good speaker originally. Was I was expected to go and talk to members of the board about why I wanted to go and spend lots and lots of money on doing this outlandish idea out in India. And if you didn't have a good story for it and you couldn't articulate the value, then it's not going to happen. You're not going to get budget for it.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that when we think about those people in TA who are saying, oh, we're perhaps undervalued, or we're not getting budget and things like that. I think there is, again, that intrinsic problem of, do you know how to talk about that to leaders? Do you understand articulating the value of the work that you do, the people that you hire, and the interactions that you have? And that's not something you necessarily need to learn by being on stage. That's by being somebody who has good business acumen and understands what their value is and is used to articulating that.
Yeah.
It's a skill that I talk about a lot that I think is important. I'll give you a good example of the importance of this. I failed maths 3 times, which is not an accolade that I like to talk about too much. But I never understood the value of doing maths. It never interested me. It was one of those slightly esoteric, and it was kind of one of those things that I didn't want to do. So I didn't put any effort into it.
Yeah.
And then in later life, I worked in sales, and I suddenly realized that if I could do maths, I could work out how much money I had at the end of the month much more accurately. So that changed my outlook. And then as things sort of moved on, I understood that when I was working a large business like G4S or like Indeed, you really have to understand, if you're looking for budget to go and do things, you have to understand the economics of what that means to the rest of the business. What are the knock-on effects there? If I'm going to go and talk to a CFO about why we need more budget to go and do X, well, you need to be able to articulate it in their language. And you need to, A, be a compelling communicator, and B, you need to be able to demonstrate exactly what it is you're talking about.
Absolutely.
I think, sadly, in TA, not everybody's been educated that way, and not everybody understands that. And that's where we wind up seeing some frustration. And particularly when we think about things like artificial intelligence, it's the great example, right? If you look at any of the studies that have been done, Burson, HBR, what we did at Indeed as well, we've all come to the same conclusion. It's 14 to 14 and a half hours a week per person in a TA team that is wasted on manual processes. Well, if I'm an FD and I look at that in isolation, that's 35% of your working week that I can automate away. So you need 35% less people. And if you can't articulate what it is you're doing and what the value is, then sadly the FD is going to take that decision. So really, if we can talk about how we build value, how we talk about our role within bringing somebody from completely cold to being an employee to retaining that person, and we can talk about the value of that, the cost of that, the opportunity cost and the loss cost, and we can do that in a compelling way that resonates with leadership teams, FDs, senior leaders, all of that kind of thing, then we're successful. So there's kind of no point in saying, we're the kind of forgotten child of businesses. Well, you're probably the forgotten child because you haven't talked about it in the right way. I would encourage you to get better at that.
Where do you think we are on that curve right now? Clearly, there has been, there was the post-COVID, the big rehire, then the sort of the big reset, and then are we coming back to a norm? It feels like TA teams are still being downsized and are being trimmed, but is that is that just the tip of the iceberg? Is there a big, you referenced 35% of your working week? Are we going to see a 35% cull in recruiters in the next few years as AI steps in?
I mean, I genuinely hope not, because I think any company that takes that sort of a decision is doing it for the wrong reasons and hasn't actually understood what recruitment is and what it's for. I think there is an inevitability that there are going to be cuts that happen in any role. If you look at 55% of jobs in the UK are going to need reskilling this year. That's 8 million jobs in the UK are directly affected by AI. But broadly, when you're thinking about that means they're affected. It doesn't mean that they're disappearing. So what we should be very conscious of is that change will come. There are always going to be some people who are probably quite happy doing that admin stuff that nobody else wants to do, that can be automated away. And frankly, if they can't articulate their value and move within the business, then there's probably going to be some loss of jobs there. It's going to be inevitable. Those people that are embracing technology and looking at it in the right kind of way and saying, well, look, this augments my abilities to go and do things, will broadly be fine. It's a difficult transition period, though, because it's all happening very, very, very rapidly.
And are workplaces ready for the pace of that change? In terms of is the workforce ready?
That's an interesting question, isn't it? We did a study in 2023 where we surveyed just under 17,000 people globally, and asked them about their kind of readiness for change and whether they believe change is coming. Broadly speaking, most people were saying yes, they do feel ready and enabled to change, and they're ready for it. But by the same token, if you look at the same cohort of people, about 45% of them said they didn't think their job would change at all in the next 5 years. So,
right.
Okay, so you're ready for it, but you don't think anything's going to happen, which I think shows probably a lack of education in the broader community. And I think that's a bit of a shame, and it's a bit worrying, to be honest, because if you look at the lists of jobs that are changing, there was this kind of idea that it's all going to be self-driving trucks and robot warehouses and things like that. That was kind of what we got sold on initially. Yeah. The reality is self-driving trucks, there's too many variables, they're too heavy, they don't really work. They will come eventually, but it's a way down the line.
Yeah. Blockchain hasn't really solved a great deal yet, apart from create Trump coin, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, exactly. And you look at automated warehouses and stuff like that. Yeah, they're great, they're amazing, they're fantastic. If you ever get to go and see one, go see it. They're brilliant. But they're really expensive, and people comparatively aren't. So that's always going to be there. It's the admin roles, it's the roles that just require you to be able to look stuff up. That's what's going to change really rapidly. And if you look at any survey data, you look at the Institute for Public Policy Research, the OECD, all of their research says exactly the same thing. That admin as a category is quite a broad category, is going to be the most affected. Yeah. Sadly, that means HR and TA are a part of that admin category.
Yeah,
we have to face it, and we have to embrace it. Whether people are ready for it is one question. Whether businesses are ready for it is a very different question, because I think lots of companies are kind of diving into this, and that's good, but you've got to make sure it's joined up, because I've seen some organizations that say, oh yeah, we've got a kind of company-wide AI and it sits over here. So, great. How good is that at doing anything in the TA space? And the answer is, well, we don't really use it for that. Well, if you're using an AI system for your company, it should cover everything. That's kind of the idea, right? So yeah, we run the risk of companies becoming siloed in the things that they do. I mean, it's not, broad existential risk right now. But I think we should just make sure that we're very joined up in our thinking about our adoption of technology.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. I mean, what is Indeed? Is there an Indeed view on AI? I guess both in your product and internally in terms of how you work. Where are you on that curve?
I mean, I think we're quite bullish, really. I think we're very aware of the way that the world is moving. The world of recruitment is changing quite rapidly. We've always had AI as kind of the backbone of what we've done. I always find it funny if I go to a conference and, well, I don't ask the question anymore because it's the most trite question in the world. Is anybody here using AI for work? It's kind of, well, if you're not, I'd be very surprised. But I always say that, and if you've got people who've got their hands down, I always ask them the question of, well, do you use Indeed? And it's like, well, yes. Great. So you do use AI in your recruitment process because that's kind of what sits in the back end of us. And, much like you guys at Tripad are going to do the same thing, people's awareness of AI is probably not as good as it should be. And people tend to think of things like ChatGPT as being kind of the big thing. It's not. It's all the other stuff that's going on. So we're very bullish about it. It's an integral part of what we do. Internally at Indeed, we use a bunch of different AI systems. We use Glean to get around all of our tools and things. We have a million different portals that you can go to. Thankfully, Glean gets around all of those, which is really nice. And we do make sure that there are controlled environments where people can use ChatGPT. We have ChatGPT built into some of our Slack areas where you can ask it questions and allow it to use different things. So yeah, we're broadly encouraging a bit. And I think as a company, we have to be, because that's the way the world is headed, right?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems like there's a gold rush out there for some companies, and every man and his dog has an AI recruiting startup right now, as far as I can tell. But Indeed, clearly you have scale, expertise, and adoption, as well as that technology backbone. I read, I think it was Hung Lee who said he expects Indeed to become the world's largest recruitment agency. I wonder if you'd heard him say that, and what your sort of response to that is.
I've heard Hung say that. I've heard Hung say all sorts of things as well. I'm a big fan of Hung, and I've known him a really, really long time. And it's one of those things. I think if you don't have an opinion on Indeed and you run a regular podcast or a newsletter, then you probably aren't very successful. I mean, let's face it. I think the podcasting duo in the US have a new take on what Indeed are going to be doing pretty much every week. So I think there's a lot of opinions out there. We'll see where things go with Indeed. I think we're a very aware animal in terms of what are we looking at, what are our growth areas. Undoubtedly we want to see things like public sector grow. We want to see the work we do in SMB grow, but also we've got some massive enterprise clients that we've still got to service. So what that looks like in the future, who knows?
Watch this space. Matt, for a guy who failed his maths 3 times, you now spend an awful lot of time looking at economic, demographic data, huge data sets, and sort of drawing out trends, conclusions, and advising the C-suite. What's your take on the UK economy and what is happening right now, and what recruiters should be aware of?
So I think economically, we're not in the greatest place at the moment. If I'm not going to be too bullish on that, but our GDP growth is incredibly slow. We were the ILO, I think, was saying that we're expected to hit about 1.2% GDP growth this year. We're probably at about 0.7, and we're very unlikely to get higher than that in short order. So that's problematic, and will continue to be problematic. There's not a lot we can do about that right now, and I think government spending is one of those things that you've really got to look at, because if we keep committing to spending and we're not getting rid of deficit, then there's challenges there. That's a very different conversation. I think when we look at what's going on in the recruitment market, we saw obviously the pretty big dip in the number of jobs that were hired in December. It was a similar dip to what we saw in, God, what was it, August 2008 or even February 2020. So if we look at where we are right now, as of a month ago, we were 15% below the pre-pandemic baseline in terms of the volume of jobs that were out there. So that's pretty low. We've got upcoming challenges that are going to happen in April. Some of those things are already starting to trickle through, and we're very aware that the kind of NI burden and the policy burden is going to come through. And we do need to be aware of that. That is inevitably going to have some degree of knock-on effect. I've worked with a lot of the larger retailers out there, and they're all kind of telling me the same thing. It's going to be that trade-off between how do we do this with hiring less people, and how do we navigate not putting prices up too rapidly, both of which are going to be a challenging thing for the wider market. I mean, the job postings are definitely lagging in the UK, but they're not getting any weaker as of now. So, you know, we did have a rebound in jobs, so that's kind of good news. So yeah, I think it's challenging, but I'm kind of optimistic that we will kind of get back to something a little bit more stable, perhaps not back to above that kind of, or significantly above that pre-pandemic baseline, but we'll probably get to something like there or thereabouts, I would imagine.
Yeah.
I would hope anyway. I mean, I'm not in the business of predicting. That's I mean,
we're
a terrible thing to do, right?
I think we all hope there's an improvement in the economy generally, don't we? Because it just seems to drive so much of everything in our lives, in terms of, if there isn't growth of tax base, and if there isn't growth of tax base, you can't invest in the services, and you're currently stuck in that complete cycle of cuts and underfunding. I mean, you know, do more with less has always been a mantra in business, and it feels like it's ever more so at the moment. What's what's your take on how do TA teams try to move away from that being the conversation they always have with leadership?
Kind of going back to what I was saying previously, that whole thing of articulate value and really demonstrate it. Also, I think we're, despite, you know, economic headwinds, whatever, I do genuinely think we're kind of in a bit of a golden age of recruitment innovation right now. I mean, you mentioned that the World News Dog's got an AI product. You know, if you haven't had somebody tell you about their new AI tool, then you haven't spoken to a vendor in the last month. That's kind of the mantra. But, you know, it is what it is. We're all trying to move in the right direction. I think the fact that you can do so much with so little now is a real advantage for people in the world of recruiting. You can streamline your job quite significantly, and you can start to think about, how do I automate things? How do I build a tool for somebody to go and do their job better? So I think if you're not in a position to go and articulate your value to leadership, because maybe you don't have access to them, you're mid-tier, you're a junior person in your role, I think the fact that you can actually sit there and think a bit more laterally about, how do I do this better? Is there a way that I can do this better? Are there tools out there that are probably free tools that you can use to go and do that job better? Obviously within your company guidelines and not putting things out there on the wider web. But I would argue for most people there is. You know, for those people that, you know, if you're a Copilot company, there are great tools that exist within Copilot to go and become significantly more efficient, and to build, you know, reporting tools, things like that you can do very, very robustly. I'm starting to see it within the Google suite, though. I confess I'm not the biggest fan of Gemini as an AI over some of the other ones that are out there. But I think that's the thing right now, is even if you're sitting there thinking, oh God, you know, AI is coming, my job's going to change, it's a great opportunity to sit there and say, great, how do I tackle this proactively? How do I take this head on? And how do I turn around and say, well, I know that we've got this problem here, but I've come up with this solution, and these are the tools that I've used to go and build it. What do you think? I've always been a believer in don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions. And even if the solution's wrong, I'd rather you went and thought it out, because that's the way that I've probably been best managed by people is actually, I've had people say, yeah, the idea is fantastic. The execution wasn't what we need, but the direction that you're going in is absolutely correct. And that gives a much better outcome. So yeah, I think it's a great time for us to be experimenting, talking to people, collaborating with others, and getting out there and using the free tools that are available, because there's a lot of them right now.
Yeah. Don't wait for the IT director and FD to come and tell you that there's a 30% cut and how you're dealing with it. Get ahead of the curve, experiment, and go to them with a plan about how you're going to be efficient, drive revenue, reduce costs, etc., etc.
Exactly. And if you could sit there and say, and this is just a spitballing thing, but if you're a recruitment leader and you're sitting there saying, oh God, they perhaps want to cut my team down, well, great. Go and have a look at your team. Go and have a look at who's performing best, who's actually hiring people, who's covering all of their recs, and who's actually getting people that stay and are well retained in the business. Go and look at the points of difference between those people that are retaining people and those people that are hitting volume, and then try and build some sort of model around that and say, well, actually, that person's really great at that part of the recruitment process. That person's really great at the other part of the recruitment process. Maybe restructure your team. Maybe think about the roles that people are doing and actually build a more robust team and say, we can do all this augmented through artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, that sounds like great advice. Matt, in terms of, we're into conference season. It always gets busy this time of year. What are the topics that have come up in perhaps a couple of recent ones that you've been really interested in, or perhaps have challenged or surprised you?
Honestly, there's not that much that comes up and surprises these days, which is an interesting thing. The conference circuit is very, very, very kind of, we must all talk about AI.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've found really, really interesting, I did an event in London a little while ago, and they did this really great little session that I've not seen anyone else do, which was you basically had to either steel man or straw man an argument. And one of the arguments that I saw was that people didn't care about branding, they cared about pay. And I was really intrigued to see how, because you had to vote on it. So there's a room of 100 odd people, and they had to vote on which way this was going. And I was really intrigued to look at this and to see what the outcome would be. And oddly, you get to the end of that, and lots of people in recruitment, very much sitting there saying, I want to go and do loads and loads of big branding projects and all this kind of stuff. And actually, the overwhelming votes, I think it was about 70-30 in the end, was that pay was more important, which may say something a bit about the industry that we're in. It may say something about the people that are in our industry rather than wider industry. But I thought that was intriguing, and actually to see, without a presentation, somebody just stand up and on the fly fight that corner. And she was incredibly passionate about it. And to see a room come back and say, yeah, you know what, I think I kind of agree. And that says something about, going back to our previous point about the economy and the way that people are feeling. I think there's something to that.
Do you think that means people are willing to compromise, and if the dollar is there, perhaps sit in a company they're not happy in because the money's decent more than perhaps they used to? Has that changed?
I couldn't evidence it, so I'd be hesitant to say. But there was this kind of notion that I remember the phrase being at every post-COVID conference. It was how you treated people during COVID will be remembered forever. And I don't think anybody remembers how anybody treated anybody during COVID now. There's obviously still clearly massive value to what you do from a branding perspective, but maybe that decision of where you go initially isn't so much driven by that. It's driven by, are they paying me the right money before I start looking at whether they're a company I actually want to go and work for?
I mean, let's face it, you'd have to have a pretty beautifully branded website to convince me to take a 50% pay cut.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of, it is self-evident, right? I don't think I'd be taking a massive pay cut just because you won some awards or your website looked great. That user-generated content video is not enough to get me to do that. Absolutely.
So with all this sort of wisdom and knowledge you've accrued If you look back to the very beginning of your career, what would you go back and tell your 20-year-old self in terms of where you are now?
God, probably pay more attention. That would be a good starting point. But I think actually it's very much for anybody who's in the early part of their career. And stuff that I wish I'd known is actually just being a bit more sort of self-confident around things. I think most people I know at some point go through periods of imposter syndrome, and that's a difficult thing for a lot of people to deal with. Even to this day, sometimes I'll be standing just about to go on stage and thinking, why am I the guy doing this? Do I really know anything more than anybody else? And I think that's a terrible thing, and it probably holds a lot of people back.
Yeah.
If you think that you can do something, you should probably try it, because there's a huge amount of opportunity out here, and it just takes a first step, right?
That sounds like wise advice, and I hope you heed it if you get to go back in that time machine. And Matt, it seems like a great point to leave it there. An optimistic view of the future and confidence in what's to come. Matt Burney from Indeed, thank you so much for joining me. You can subscribe for future episodes at tribepad.com/theview, and we'll see you next time.